So, today we're going to be talking about Monkey Man, starring Dev Patel, directed by Dev Patel, produced and written in part by Dev Patel. Monkey Man is to Dev Patel as, say, the movie Clean was to Adrian Brody, or A Quiet Place was to John Krasinski. It seems that Monkey Man is Dev Patel's kind of his baby, his passion project. Like I said, he directed it, he starred in it, he produced and wrote it in part with some contributors, Jordan Peele being a contributing producer. How I would describe this movie is it's a mix of, as a lot of people are saying, John Wick, with some Cinderella Man and some RRR. If you could roll those movies, all three of those movies into one, or take elements from all three of those movies, that's kind of how I would describe this movie, with a little bit of the frenetic, frantic, chaotic energy that some of the Bourne movies can have in the fighting. At its core, I would say it's a revenge film, which I love a good revenge film. But it has threads throughout of like a fighter movie, kind of like a Rocky, or like I said, a Cinderella Man. And then it has a lot of heart to it. It has the basic motive of revenge that the main character has throughout the movie is rooted in a place of grief and anger and some very cutting personal as well as social and even religious issues. And so there's a lot of heart to the movie, even more so than I would say a film like John Wick. John Wick has its genius, I would say, in its very basic story, with really well executed, pizzazzy fight scenes. The story of John Wick is endearing, but it's not a very, I would say, deep story. Whereas this is a deep story. So for the people who are saying this is like the Indian John Wick, I would say there's an element of truth to that. But it's a lot more. There's a lot more to the plot. There's a lot more to the story in Monkey Man than there is in a film like John Wick, I would say. Surprisingly, I have only ever seen Dev Patel in The Green Knight, I believe. I've never seen Slumdog Millionaire, though I fully intend to watch that very soon. I would say Dev Patel is a very good lead in this movie. Obviously, like I said, it's his passion project, so he threw himself into it to a great extent, and he really conveyed emotion well, he conveyed pain well, he conveyed anger very well, because it is a movie that at times builds to his character lashing out in anger and emotion and frustration. And he portrayed that very well. He was very good in the fight scenes. The choreography for the fight scenes was very good, and he did very well executing those. I would say that the choreography for the fight scenes was sold very well. The hits seemed very hard. They were sold very well. It was maybe not as intricate as something like John Wick, but it had its moments of intricacy that were pretty impressive. And speaking of John Wick, there is a nice nod to John Wick in this movie. The first time that Dev Patel goes out to execute his revenge mission, he's choosing a weapon, and there's a reference to John Wick where they call out John Wick specifically, which I thought was nice, because there's one scene in particular toward the end of the movie that I would say is very influenced by John Wick and kind of the aesthetic style, and so I was happy that they at least nodded to John Wick. But like I said, for everyone who's comparing it directly to John Wick and saying it's the Indian John Wick, I would say that this movie's a lot different than John Wick. I think the issues that it attempts to tackle and to touch in this movie are far deeper than anything that John Wick ever does. So basically, as far as plot goes, we have Dev Patel. We're introduced to him first as a child, and then immediately after as a kind of underground fighter. Pretty quickly in the movie, we're cued off to the fact that there's something in his past that is kind of driving kind of a deep-seated anger and fury inside of him. And again, rather early on in the film, we're introduced to this idea that he is using this position in underground fighting to gain access to kind of the criminal underground of his city, to seemingly exact some sort of revenge on someone who has done something. And that's kind of the unfolding throughout the movie, is figuring out what exactly has happened to him. And I appreciated the way that it unfolded throughout the movie. Again, I would liken it to the movie RRR, in that film, we are introduced to Ram, and fairly early on in the movie, we're led on to the fact that Ram has some history. He has some deep-seated trauma that is fueling his tenacity and his anger and his fury. And I would say it's very similar in this movie, that, again, we're introduced to the fact that Dev Patel's character has something going on in his past that is fueling his anger, that is fueling his drive to get back at these people, but we're not sure what it is. In Monkey Man, it's unfolded to us in a series of flashbacks, and then there's one decisive flashback that gives us the whole story, basically, and that's more toward I would say the 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the movie. So I appreciated the way it unfolded, because it doesn't just give you it all right at the beginning. It unfolds in a way that it keeps you engaged in the story, wondering what exactly happened, why is he going after these people. We know it's something traumatic, we know it's something bad, but we don't quite know what it is. I appreciated the way that it unfolded that to keep you engaged. And I will say it was a film that was not, at least to me, was not predictable. It kept me guessing. It maybe subverted even some expectations in some places where I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And it just keeps the story flowing very well. It's a rather fast-paced movie, too. It's a little under 2 hours, but it keeps a move on. It keeps going. I would say the only problem, and this isn't a big problem, but the only problem I would have potentially with the film is, which I understand this is a stylistic choice, in some of the fight scenes, it's very frantic, it's very frenetic, it's very chaotic, and a lot of the shots in this movie, like most of the shots in this movie, are very tightly framed shots, so they're very claustrophobic. And the fight scenes is a lot of handheld camera work, and so with these tight shots that are handheld and kind of frantic, you get almost, like I said before, that Jason Bourne effect, where sometimes it's a little difficult to follow the motion, just because there's a lot of out of focus, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of flashing by the screen. And I would say that's the closest thing I have to a criticism of this film. There were times where I got almost to the point where I was like, okay, wow, this is a lot for my eyes, but I was never taken to the point where I was like, okay, that's too much. I think they used it in a good way to express this chaos, this fury, this anger. For this being Dev Patel's directorial debut, his passion project, his baby, I would say it was a very good first film for him. I was very impressed with it. It tugged at my heartstrings. It kept me engaged. It was good action. It was a good thrill, and I really enjoyed it. So I would give it a solid 18 out of 24. I would definitely recommend you go see it in theaters.